All right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. The discussion was going on even during the break, but we'd like to hear from you. What is your experience dealing with the Kenya Power? What more do you think should be done to ensure that our prices go down? We've seen several pronouncements from the president. It hasn't happened yet. So it turns out that Kenya has at about 19 power generating farms that supply power to Kenya Power. Kenya Power is the sole distributor of power, so it buys from them. KETRACO is yet to deliver 400 kV of the Olkaria Lesos Kisumu line. At the same time, the 220 kV Garsen Bura Hola Garissa line is still not been done. Domestic consumption is standing at 2,699 gigawatts per hour and against a capacity of 10,700. Forget about all the numbers. I know what you're wondering is, how come my power bill is not low? That is the main concern. When it comes to you, it is extremely high. So, and I'll start with you, Said. In Tanzania, President Magufuli directed the Tanzania Electric Supply Company, that's TANASCO, to lower electricity tariffs after getting cheaper power generated from gas and geothermal as well. In Uganda, loan repayment was extended to 15 years for the Bujagali hydropower, sort of had relief for the people. Why are we struggling?
Thank you. This is the multi-trillion shilling question that we should be asking. Why are we struggling? I think as domestic consumers, and I know my colleagues here will speak about the commercial side of things, as domestic consumers, we have and continue to suffer from a loading of tariffs that are based on a series of agreements and contracts, often unprocedural, even unconstitutional, that tie us into agreements with power producers for years and years and years. And these capacity charges, or rent seeking as I refer to them as, have somehow to be paid. And these find their way through the national budget into the tariff structure. And in the tariff structure that domestic consumers have to live with, there's a plethora of pass-through tariffs that we also have to deal with. So you have your kilowatt per kilowatt hour charge, your unit charge, but you also have your fuel, you have your forex, you have your warmer, you have your rep, you have your inflation, you have your VAT, of course. And at the end of the day, you're looking at a package that, no matter what, will never bring energy down to an affordable place. And yes, the president has often said, bring the cost of power down. We want to see a lowered cost, but we literally can't, because we are straitjacketed into a series of deals that we have committed ourselves to over the next 20 to 25 years. So when you see Kenya Power come up with tariffs that are of course set up by ERC, I think now EPRA, Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, you have a series of tariffs that never are consistent. If you consume less than 100 units a month consistently over 3 months, you pay 10 shillings per kilowatt hour. If for any reason you average above the 100 units per month, maybe you had visitors, maybe you had something you were doing and your domestic consumption spiked and your average over 3 months is over 100, your bill goes up to 15 shillings and 80 cents per kilowatt hour. How are we supposed to plan for our budgets, our households? In fact, the more you consume, the more you're punished as a domestic consumer. So in fact, you'd imagine that they'd be happy that we're consuming 200 kilowatts a month or 300 kilowatts, but the minute you pass the 100, you're all lumped into the 15 shillings and 80 cents per kilowatt hour. So what happens, and when I receive queries, and I don't even work for the energy sector, I work for Kenya and I work on consumer justice issues, they continuously say, my units, I put 500 shillings in, I don't get the same number of tokens. Right. I put 1,000, it's different. It's because there's this continuous game. But when you unpick it, and I also want to say that despite the fact that the campaign we run is switch off KPLC, KPLC is the tip of the iceberg of a massive, vast, dark, murky energy sector. And in fact, when you unpick and problematize and go back into generation, transmission, regulation, you look at issues of oil, its importation, you look at issues of tendering systems, you look at procurement, you realize that the front end, which is Kenya Power, that loads its bills on us, is actually carrying the heavy weight of a series of deals that we had nothing to do with as or Kenya, and that benefit a few. In short, I'm talking about theft, I'm talking about corruption. So there's no way we are going to enjoy enjoy 3 shillings per kilowatt hour, 4 shillings or 5 shillings, until we address the elephant in the room, which is impunity and corruption in the energy sector. And of course, we don't have enough time to go into the deep, intricate details, but that's where it goes. Right. So at the end of the day, you are struggling. Your 500 shillings this month will not buy you what it will buy you next month, or 100 shillings, and on top of that, you will, if you're postpaid, receive the most incredible fraudulent bills. Somebody yesterday said, I live in an apartment and I received a 38,000 shilling bill. People are receiving 150,000, 40,000, 10,000, 15,000. We cannot plan our households, our budgets. We're suffering, we're drowning, and I do not see the end until we unpick the energy sector.
But also, in all fairness, the bills that you're talking about, there were some employees who were actually taken to court concerning that. So it was revealed that they were conspiring to make sure that the bills are exaggerated. So something is being done.
Something is being done, but my problem with the something being done, and I have tweeted at length about it, is that it is the red herring. It is the diversionary tactic to say, yes, even when the DCI says 150 billion may have gone missing, we're all shocked and we gasp, because that is an astronomical amount. You're talking about 9 zeros after 150 to say this has been stolen from consumers over time. But if you go deeper, as I referred to the subterranean elements of the energy sector that you and I don't see because we are not specialists in that sector, we're talking about in excess of 6 trillion shillings. And that has 12 zeros, 6 and 12 zeros. So when it is good, and I believe that anybody who has been caught defrauding consumers should face the full extent of the law. But I'm fed up of this situation of scapegoating the middle and lower level functionaries and saying, this is the reason why your bill is high. Yes, it is, but not the whole story.
Sylvester, you were smiling, especially when you told us the story of 38,000 for one person in an apartment. From where you stand as an energy advisor, what factors are these that push for continuous high power prices for consumers?
Let me start by saying that the energy sector in Kenya particularly has grown over time. And we started off in year 2000, when we had a serious drought in this country, and the country went through a power rationing. And the impact of that power rationing was that industries closed or they scaled down, and the repercussions were really hard on the economy. So the sector sat down and consulted internally, and I think they came up with a policy framework. And this policy framework was to provide adequate power. And the reasoning then, or the argument then, was that power available is far much cheaper than no power at all. That means that you are better off having power, even though it is a little bit more expensive, but you have it. You can decide to use or not to use, but you have it. But the cost of not having power is far much higher. That was a decision made. And then the country moved into investing into the energy sector, infrastructure. There was the generation, we were low on generation, and they invested in generation. And what were the quick fixes? Quick fixes were bringing thermal power plants, and these thermal power plants came in with a promise that they'll be there to support the system then in 2000 and progressively over time and beyond. Then there was another phase that said, now let's invest in our own natural resources, and there was money channeled into the geothermal and expanding the infrastructure and all that.
Yeah.
What has happened now? The chickens have come home to roosts, that we have the capacity. The infrastructure is not yet done as planned, and the consumption is not there. Consumption has not grown.
Infrastructure not done as planned, consumption has also not grown.
Consumption has not grown.
And still a drought, which is what also began this conversation, your answer.
Exactly. So what's happening is we have 2,700 thereabout of capacity, with a demand of 1,800 or thereabout, but with an average load factor of around, we're just looking at the peak. The 1,800 is a peak, which means we could be operating at lower, 1,300, 1,500 or thereabout on average.
There's an excess of about 1,000.
You could be having an excess of about 1,000. But why is this 1,000 resting? It's resting in a myriad of them. The thermal plants, you have the intermittent plants, and we have all that.
Yeah.
To Kenya Power, they have a bill to pay. And I'm not talking about Kenya Power. The economics of energy is that somebody must pay for it. If you are renting an apartment, whether you are sleeping there, or you are partying there, or you are simply renting it, you pay for the rent. And that is the structure we have. So Kenya Power has a bill to pay. And that is what is driving the cost higher.
And higher.
And higher. Because you are selling so little, and you have a burden and obligation to pay the rentals that you have signed contracts with. And this will continue.
Okay. So we're not seeing any time power going down?
I don't want to be a prophet of doom, but the only strategy for us now, under the circumstances, is to try and spur consumption. And this is by increasing the manufacturing sector uptake, or scaling up industries.
But what about opening the field so that we have other competitors, just apart from Kenya Power, to be the one supplying power, so that there's healthy competition? Would that work?
Actually, the law has opened it, but what is happening is we have people operating mini grids.
Okay.
So that if you identify your own consumer, set of consumers, or a pool of consumers, you are allowed to apply for a license to supply them. But what is happening with the mini grids, they are not benefiting from the already built infrastructure and network. So
if you have one, you have to have your own infrastructure.
You got to have your own infrastructure.
Let me bring in Johnston on this. And Johnston, there are two arguments that I read about when I was doing this background research on these numbers of energy. Rizwan Fazal, who's the Turkana Wind Power Executive Director, says the reason cost of power is not coming down is excess power lying idle in the system that has left the consumer with the burden of paying for idle capacity. The counter-argument from the energy research professor Da Silva from Strathmore, he argues that the issue is not idle capacity but lack of transmission power lines, the people who actually need it the most. From where you stand, which is which?
That is a coin.
Yeah, we seem to be having a lot of power, no one to consume it, but yet it's still expensive.
Two things that we have to contend with as a country, and I don't want to repeat what Makaka said. The genesis of where we are is because of our past. That we had a past that we had to bring in immediate power sources that would meet the deficit. And that's how the so-called independent power producers came into being. And were contracted fairly and formally, with contracts running between 25 and 30 years. From my own knowledge, having worked in the sector, is that some of these contracts have run out. They have not been renewed. Few are still on course. And once they're done, they will have to be phased out. And that has been the government position. Now, two things we need to appreciate. That one, we continue to have new sources coming into the system. And this is the basis of the so-called excess power. For example, toward the end of last year, Lake Turkana came into the system, what is being produced as wind power, into a system that already had other generation sources. And these are hydro, geothermal, and what I call thermal. We are talking, at the same time, we're talking of a system that need to be expanded. And that is where the transmission element is coming in. The discussion has always been power can be dispensed as easily as airtime. I think that is a misnomer. You can't do that because you need the infrastructure. This power we are having it here right now has come through a system. I have my phone here, I want to buy airtime, I'll just buy it immediately. I don't need the infrastructure, so to speak. I can have what is called independent infrastructure. That is a base station, probably sitting out or near around here, for me to get the airtime. And the transmission infrastructure is a missing link. Today, Lake Turkana was able to bring in power into the system because a transmission line was done from Olengalani all the way to Suswa. The same transmission line or rather, a similar transmission line need to take that power beyond Suswa. I know for a fact that one is to bring the power from Suswa to a substation in Isinya. That substation is meant to now take that power, and remember, already geothermal is in existence. So there is already power coming into Suswa from geothermal in Olkaria. So Lake Turkana is an addition. Just like, let's take the case of a road. All of us knows, let's take Thika Road. A typical case. Thika Road was done. 3 lanes, 4 lanes, both sides. You run into, right now coming into town, it's very easy because we are all on 4 lanes. But the moment you get to Ngara, it narrows down to 1 lane. So what happens? The backup. If your guys can take can give us a live feed of Thika Road right now, it's backed up all the way to.
So that is the problem we have right now.
That is the challenge. That yes, we are having more power coming in as fast as possible, because once you start generating, it has to be evacuated. There is no debate about it. Let me finish. But then the moment you get into the system, is the network ready? And the transmission network. So it comes, and please understand, and I love those graphics, the power comes from wherever to Suswa. Suswa takes it to Isinya. Isinya has to dispense the power. The Suswa transmission station owned by Ketraco has to dispense it from there. So where does it take it? It brings it to Nairobi as a first step. And that's why Nairobi today, literally an issue of a Nairobi blackout is difficult to experience. We have intermittent breakdown.
In different segments.
Yes, but supply is not the issue.
Infrastructure.
Power is there. Now, the same power needs to be transmitted to Mombasa, another region that faces a power deficit when we have, as we speak, an excess or idle capacity. The network to Mombasa is completed, but there are missing components. In Mombasa, you would require what is called a step-down substation. Because the power that comes in the system, in those big lines, is 440 kilovolts. You can't just bring it and, it's like bringing water. And the next thing you want to pipe into a small pipe, it will burst.
It will burst,
So now in Mombasa, is one element. Is there a step-down transmission substation? It is not there. It is under construction. That is another issue. West Kenya, Nyanza, all those are region facing power deficit, so to speak.
Let's look in,
I want to just come in, and I can, on certain levels, agree with my brother in terms of the technicalities of transmission and stepping down and so on and so forth. But I'm glad you raised Lake Turkana wind power, because the very same Lake Turkana wind power, where we also have issues around its contracting, and I disagree respectfully with you that all these PPAs are negotiated fairly and transparently. But if you come back to Lake Turkana Wind Power is the same company that selected Isolux, which is a Spanish company, that Ketraco then contracted to build the line from Loyangalani to Suswa. And Isolux went bankrupt midway and did not complete the work. And who paid the penalties, the capacity charges? Because at that point, Lake Turkana was ready to transmit, but there was no line. And because there was no line, we paid penalties. We have paid today up to 6.7 billion shillings and counting in penalties to Lake Turkana Wind Power. So I'm not here so much to dispute that transmission and distribution is where we have a lot of losses, but I'm here to question the government's 15% load growth projection over the next until 2030. Why 15%? That's about 15,000 megawatts. Of course there'll be idle capacity. Of course we won't be able to use it. Right now we are using about 1,800 as Kenyans. So when you project and you say we need 15%, then it forces you to bring independent power producers on board in anticipation of this amazing 15,000 megawatt over the next X number of years that we shall be using. And when you have the same independent power producers that are contracted, that are rent seeking, seeking, that are earning their capacity charges no matter what. That is how our costs never go down. But I agree that there's a question with transmission, and transmission is never really discussed. And I want to tell you, and I want to thank Citizen for being even willing and able to discuss this power issue, which is highly political or politicized, because it affects my pocket, but it also touches on big bucks. I can say right now that even in the transmission sector where you have the issue of NLC and wayleave compensation, the World Bank, and this is news for you, the World Bank has actually come back and admitted that there's been misappropriation and irregularities around wayleave compensation for the Kenya-Ethiopia interconnector. We are looking at Marsabit, we're looking at Samburu, Laikipia, Nyandarua, all the way to Nakuru. So even though we are saying there's a problem with transmission, there's monies there, billions and billions of shillings that go missing in action, budgeted for every year. And we come back and make excuses about, oh, it's this, we need to step up, we need to step down, oh, things were transparent. But every year, these monies are budgeted for. Every year, we pay for them. And that's how our bills get loaded. And that's how the broad taxpayer, even if you're not an electricity consumer, has these costs passed on to them.
So do you think having separate independent companies within the power sector can help curb corruption and also increase competition to make sure that Kenyans are spoiled for choice in terms of packages?
Absolutely. You see, Kenya Power will not stand up and say we are a monopoly. But they have monopolistic tendencies and behave exactly like a monopoly. And the fourth schedule of the Constitution says that utilities should be devolved to counties. Counties, how come counties and regions of Kenya have not been allowed to sit around and say, how are we going to deal with our power requirements? If you look at the solar farm in Garissa, which KenGen is about to take over, and there's some very, very dirty games behind that as well, which will cost the taxpayer and the electricity consumer a lot of money. Why does that power have to come all the way to Suswa to come back to Garissa? There is no way that that solar farm is feeding and powering powering Garissa. So people may disagree, but you have this case. So even in Marsabit, how is the power reaching people in Marsabit when you're evacuating all the wind power from Lake Turkana?
And you already I'm going to give you a chance to give just 1 minute. But you've already brought in Turkana, Garissa, and Marsabit, and this now leads me to my next question, which is: do our energy systems benefit the rich and sort of bypass the poor, and how do we begin to correct that? Should energy be considered an issue where inequality is being seen as well? Because you brought in Turkana, Garissa, and Marsabit.
Yes, the northern frontier parts of the country where we are generating a lot of power. Let's not even start with oil and all those other things. Those are some of still the most impoverished counties in Kenya today. And places that could have benefited from things like wayleave compensation. In Marsabit, you look at the fighting that's been happening, the killing of elders, the cross-border skirmishes. You're looking at places where the resource-based conflict is very high. And even just in the power space, if we were able to appropriately deal with the issue of wayleave compensation, you would see communities that actually have access to resources. It's a Community Land Act that Duale is still sitting on and that Parliament has not yet cleared. So if we were to deal with the Community Land Act that has to do with compensation, that deals with issues of wayleave, whether it's the Lesos interconnector, whether it's a Kenya-Ethiopia, wherever it is, you'll see there are always conflicts and somehow people are not compensated appropriately. So the northern part of Kenya is the most heavily and adversely impacted. And I can definitely say unequivocally that the issue of energy access is very class-based, it's very anti-poor. Even though we talk about last mile, even though we talk about rural connectivity, what is access? If your power line is passing through a village with 300 huts, then you say, oh, we have provided access. What about whether those families are actually able to sustain that meter once you've put it in there? But you've put a tick, and in our levies we pay REP. We pay a REP levy, the Rural Electrification Project levy, in every single bill that we have. And yet at the end of the day, if you go and see a mud hut with thatch and a meter that's just sitting there, are people productively using their energy? Is it affordable? Is it sustainable? So energy in Kenya is still not pro-poor, and it's not accessible. And even those who are not poor, who could possibly afford it and pay for it, cannot afford it.
All right, I have to take a quick break now, but when we come back, we'll give the gentleman a chance to speak and counter what he's saying. But we'll also see some of your feedback coming through. Let's read some of them right now. It's the hashtag you're using is Daybreak. Let's bring them up at Citizen TV Kenya, Trevor Mbija, Zinzi K. You can always let us know what you think. Let's see the first one. Dungu Wanaina. Says state capture, systematic and extensive state institutions are erosion, patronage-based political governance, institutionalized corruption, corrupt politicians deliberately weakening and co-opted state institutions, and disregard of constitution and rule of law are Kenya's curse. Wow.
Still on Twitter, Lazaro, good morning. You say basic needs, water, electricity, education, health, food, all those 5 things. If you make any too expensive, then expect Kenyans to resort to other illegal means of getting it. Power bill shouldn't exceed 200 bob, and company earnings will double.
All right. Let's see another one here on Twitter still. Tanto says, why do I have to pay 23 shillings 0.7 per unit, yet my next door neighbor pays 14.9 per unit? Right. That is the fluctuations we're talking about here. On 22422 is the SMS line you can use. We have Komen from Eldoret. While many Kenyans celebrate the milestones achieved in the energy sector, it is heartbreaking that some rogue employees at utility companies sabotage the same. Stories surrounding theft of tokens at Kenya Power is a testament to this. Many Kenyans have disconnected themselves from the national grid out of such frustrations. How then can we industrialize without affordable energy? All right.
Still on the SMS 224 is the SMS line. Professor Irina, you say the way forward is nuclear power generation. We'll definitely be talking about alternative sources and whether enough money is being tabled into investments such as geothermal, wind and solar. But right now we need to take a commercial break. When we come back, we return with this conversation. Stay with us.